David Llewellyn flew an Aronca C-3 from London to Johannesburg in February 1936. In total, the flight took about 3 weeks and 120 hours and was plagued with poor weather for most of the route. I told the whole story a couple of years ago in this film. I shan't repeat the story today. Suffice to say, Llewellyn did make it to Johannesburg after a rather interesting forced landing in northern Tanzania. This photograph was taken on arrival at Rand Airport in Johannesburg. Llewellyn returned to London on Imperial Airways. Later the same year, entered the Schlesinger Air Race, accompanied by Charles Houston, flying a Percival Gull. They led the race until near Abercorn, when a forced landing damaged the aircraft beyond repair. In September 1938, whilst flying this BA Swallow from Lymm in Kent, David Llewellyn was killed, along with his pupil, Lieutenant John Kitson. Comparatively little is known about David Llewellyn, which is why I haven't made a film about him yet. A bag containing his logbook, licences, and all manner of flying paperwork was stolen from a family home many years ago. Even his gravesite was unknown to his surviving family. A bit of amateur detective work, aided by the Vicar of Lymm, proved that David Llewellyn is buried next to his dear friend Bill Davis, the east end of Lymm churchyard. There is no headstone or grave marker. A couple of years ago I had a minor engine failure in the Aronca when an exhaust valve stuck open in the circuit at Bodmin. It was no problem, I just landed on the grass anyway. But when I took the cylinders back next day, I'd forgotten to put my toolkit in the car. I reassembled the engine using the contents of what I call the Llewellyn bag. A subscriber sensibly asked, "What's the Llewellyn bag? And more importantly, what's in it?" So this is the Llewellyn bag, and it has his name on the side. That's not actually for any great sentimental reason. It's so I don't get it muddled up with that bag, which is awfully similar. I'll open the bag up and lay the contents out across this map of the world. So that's everything. I might as well go through and explain the logic behind everything that goes in the bag, because the whole point of this is for it to be as light as possible. This spanner is the correct size for the cylinder base nuts, which is the normal way I take the cylinders off. So it's worth having because I don't like using adjustables on anything that's quite critical. You'll notice it's a short spanner. It's into an aluminium case. It doesn't need to be cranked up really tight, so a nice short well-fitting spanner is ideal. Leatherman, had this for years, very useful, all manner of gadgets on it. They're one of those things that pilots used to carry in their flight bag, but since all these silly security rules, because we're all terrorists now, then can't carry one to work, but it's great in the back of the aeroplane. Adjustable spanner, I think that's pretty obvious. This spanner, particularly the bigger end, fits all manner of nuts and bolts on the aeroplane, which are a bit of a mixture. This is actually a 3/16 Whitworth spanner, but it also fits a 7/16 AF nut very well, so it can be used for both. Set of multi-bit screwdrivers, again, pretty obvious. One decent flat-bladed screwdriver, useful for all manner of things, including fending off tigers, etc. But more importantly, you can use it for levering and prying at things, as well as its intended purpose. This bag has got all manner of nuts, bolts, washers, a few more tie wraps, split pins, and stuff in it. Again, doesn't weigh very much, and there's quite a lot of useful things there. Fuel strainer cup fits the Curtis valve on the gasculator bowl that's on the bulkhead. If I open the top cowling, I can reach in and take a fuel sample. A hank of locking wire, 2 valve collets. Now, I'm not intending to take the engine apart at every opportunity, but these are the kind of things, a bit like David Llewellyn's split pin on the pistons, that could go missing and would be an absolute devil to find again. I've got boxes of them, so there's 2 in a bag. A spark plug. A magneto end cap. These can crack. It doesn't usually mean they fail. In fact, I've got a couple that are glued up, but I had a spare and it might as well live in the bag. Vaseline. Useful for all manner of things, said Jeremy Thorpe. This is a rocker shaft. It's a standard shaft. I've got boxes of them, and I've ground a taper on it. and it means one can put the rockers into the cylinder heads, which are a very, very tight fit, and then use this tapered, ground up, buggered up bolt basically to line them all up properly, tap it through, and then put the proper bolt in from the other end. And of course all the roller bearings are lined up nicely in the head and the proper shaft goes straight through. You can put the nut on the end and pin it. Roll of tape. A pair of scissors, small. You might wonder why I'm carrying those, but years ago when I first had the aeroplane, I landed somewhere and it started running on one cylinder, and it had eaten an inlet gasket between the inlet pipe and the cylinder head. Where that gasket had gone, I'll never know, but I was able to quickly carve one out of a piece of cardboard and stick it on. 3 tie wraps, longer variety, useful for all manner of things, including tying people up. Maybe the Vaseline would be helpful then too. This is the valve adjuster spanner. Now without this one would be a bit lost adjusting the valves, and you'll see that it has some Colin Chapman influence upon it. The rockers are set down slightly in the head, and this hole here means one can put the flat bladed screwdriver, which has already gone in the bag, in the middle there and adjust the valve clearances. It's an absolute must-have tool for doing the valve clearances on the Aeronca. It doesn't weigh very much. Plug spanner and a Tommy bar. Now this plug spanner actually came off a lawnmower. It's really lightweight, it's terribly thin, really thin steel, but it's ideal for an aeroplane toolkit because it weighs nothing. The Tommy bar can be used as a drift as well, so it's quite a useful sort of double tool. Now the last things left on the bench are all to do with magnetos. And oddly enough, the only breakdowns I've ever had, other than the ones like this one here, which JB Weld tie wraps and anything else weren't going to help, were actually magneto problems. So in this bag is a spare magneto spring, a spare secondary magneto spring. There's a couple more secondaries in there, and also a pair of points. I've also got this complete contact breaker assembly, which goes with those points there, because I happen to have it spare, and again it weighs nothing, and why wouldn't one use it? The Achilles heel on these BTH magnetos is this spring, which very occasionally breaks. It sits inside this end cap. Now this bit here, I did a film about ignition on the Aeronca years ago, but that bit's attached to the advance and retard mechanism. This can all be done with the magneto still on the aeroplane. The points are under here, and it's a rotating points magneto rather than a fixed points magneto. And the spring is inside here and wrapped around the contact breaker assembly. Now, when it breaks, the magneto dies, but it doesn't do any other damage. The spring just slides around inside, and it doesn't chew up the cam ring or anything. However, they're terribly easy to change. Simply one disconnects the pin from there, takes this off. Then we get our little magneto spanners that were of course in our toolkit. And the second spanner. Undo that center nut. There we are. You see I've done this before because it wasn't very tight, but that doesn't matter. And the whole contact breaker assembly comes away. Now, if you look there, I'm holding it correctly, you can see there's a little key pressed into the taper on the contact breaker assembly. Now, the clever bit is how to change the spring. Simply this is slid out of the way. That now allows the points to come off. And if I undo that one screw there, I can take the whole points assembly away like so. Now, I don't advocate you doing this in the middle of the field. If you have to, lay something out on the ground and kneel down and do it carefully, because there's 2 or 3 little screws to change. However, basically that comes off to give you an assembly like that. And obviously to change this spring, if it's broken, this screw comes out. The new spring along with its helper spring are fitted. The screws put back in here. The contact breaker is then carefully wrapped around, put back over the post here and slid back on. Now you're probably wondering why you're going to do that, because you've now messed up all the timing. But of course you haven't, because what you haven't done, unless you've actually changed the points themselves, points gap hasn't changed, none of the timing has changed at all. So this can go straight back on there. So carefully twist it until it engages. There we are, it's engaged on that little keyway. And the centre bolt goes back in. And so that dead magneto that was a bit of a showstopper a few minutes ago is now fixed. Now, that doesn't come under pilot maintenance, of course. So if you're running under the LAA or anyone else, you officially, of course, have to find yourself an inspector to sign off what you've just done. What you actually do is between you, your conscience, and your imaginary friend, if you have one. Anyway, it's terribly easy to do that, and I've had to do it twice. Fortunately, it happened, oddly enough, at an aerodrome nearby where an inspector is available, so it wasn't a problem. That goes on like so. So all this magneto stuff is carried because in 20-something years I've had 2 of these springs fail. Never a problem if you've got spares. Now, this here is the correct size spanner for adjusting the points, because you really need 2 of them. There's a correct size one on the magneto spanners, there's a correct size one here as well, and that's the correct feeler gauge. So that all goes in the Llewellyn bag. So of course you're wondering what all this weighs. So my wife upgraded the kitchen scales a while back, so I stole these. So the Llewellyn bag comes in at just under 3.5 pounds. That's 1.6 kilos if you're a Napoleonic type. That's everything we've looked at in the bag. So I think that's quite an acceptable amount of stuff to carry around, given that it's solved most of the problems I've ever had with the aeroplane. Other things I do carry routinely, an inner tube. I think that's a really sensible thing to carry. Again, easy to change if you have one, and it weighs, well, less than 3/4 pound. I'm not sure how accurate Dr. Octa's scales are really. I think these are probably calibrated in scruples rather than pounds or kilos. Anyway, little over ½ pound. One other thing everyone should carry in the back of their aeroplane always: a roll of duct tape. Again, weighs well under £1 and is really useful for all manner of things: fabric repairs, broken windows. You see those lovely bits of film of aeroplanes in Alaska that get savaged by bears because there's some meat inside the aeroplane and then get flown home after being stuck together with bin liners and duct tape. A notable thing I don't carry is a pair of vice grips. Would you believe I actually found these under the seat of an aeroplane in Mozambique? I don't know how long they've been there. The seat wouldn't move properly, and it wasn't actually these causing the trouble, but I sort of got on my head, looked up under the seat, and there was a pair of vice grips, so I was a pair of vice grips better off, and they're quite good. I don't think they've really got a place in an aeroplane, unless you're John Denver. Of course, a couple of years ago I went up to Kent, and actually on that trip I took 2 spare magnetos. These magnetos, I'm not sure how accurate these scales really are, but I know these non-impulse ones weigh £5, and the impulse one weighs £6. Now, I wouldn't advocate carrying them normally, but it would have been an absolute bloody nuisance if I'd had a dead magneto a long way from home, and they're light enough to bother carrying, because ignition problems are a real showstopper. If you're going to change magnetos, then obviously you want to carry the buzz box as well. This thing weighs nothing. Again, on my wondrously inaccurate scales, let's try and get that somewhere near 0. It's probably less than £1. Yeah, well, £0.5. So definitely worth carrying. So 2 mags and the buzz box, £12. Well, that wraps it up, I think. Do let me know what you carry in your aeroplane and why. And I very much welcome comments about things to carry, things not to carry, what's a good idea and what's a foolish one. And as always, thank you for watching.